Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. My name is Stephen Railston and we're recording this episode just after 4 o'clock on a Monday afternoon. I'm joined by Samuel Luckhurst and we're reacting to the breaking story today that Erik ten Hag has been sacked as Manchester United manager after the defeat against West Ham on Sunday afternoon. Samuel, we originally recorded a podcast earlier in the day and we discussed the individual performances of the players and what it might mean for Ten Hag. This was a huge story. It came around, was it just as we finished recording that episode, it broke. What's your initial reaction? I don't think either of us were expecting it after that performance because of how they lost.
Yeah, it wasn't a shock still. I mean, I even half joked with my dad after the game yesterday that, because they've lost in quite an unfortunate way, Ineos will go ahead and sack him now, and they have done that. And of course, they haven't just decided on the back of that performance or that result yesterday. I expect that they set the wheels in motion some time ago. It is inexplicable why they've given him 3 games into a 7-game block after the October internationals when they should have just done it during the October international fortnight. They had those 2 meetings, one on the Monday, one on the Tuesday, one in Manchester, one in London, and they've just been beaten about the bush. And as I've said before, although a manager is always going to be the central to a sacking story because it's the manager who's been sacked, I think the bigger picture, the bigger story in a way, it's been Ineos's handling of this really shambolic 5 or 6 month period dating back to May. I mean, I wrote after that Coventry farce in April that Ten Hag should go, and maybe it was a little bit over emotional or a little bit too raw. And of course, United were vindicated in keeping him for the FA Cup final because they won it, and they won it in a tremendous way. It was a remarkable and unexpected performance. But he had to go after then, and they were looking at replacements to replace him with. To then keep him when they didn't want to keep him, to then extend his contract when they didn't really want to extend his contract, and then the most befuddling act in all this, to then embark on a spending spree, a Dutch-centric transfer window, where they invested more than £200 million on players. One of them who's still not actually played under Ten Hag in a competitive game, in Lenny Oro, was completely illogical. It completely flies in the face of how elite football clubs run. And United are paying the price really for not again. It's poor preparation. We go back to last summer and not getting a proper striker in, and they're still feeling the ramifications of that. That, of course, had a bearing on Ten Hag's second season and this season. But it really has been death by a thousand cuts when they should have cut him loose in May. I felt probably early October last year that he was in trouble just because they'd lost 6 games out of, must have been 11 games at that point. I think they might have won 5 and lost 6, 4 in the Premier League, 2 in the Champions League. And ironically, since the day McTominay saved his skin against Brentford, I've just thought he's looked out of his depth. He's not sounded like the United manager that he was in the first season. United have seldom played as authoritatively as they did a number of times in that first season. You could, apart from the FA Cup final, it's really difficult to settle on one match from start to finish where they've won and there haven't been any caveats really. And really, this should have been ended a long, long time ago. So Jim Ratcliffe never spoke convincingly of him. The notion that Ratcliffe had no say in the decision-making process, I don't think anybody believes that. And whatever excuses they come up with, I don't think anybody, in terms of delaying the decision, ultimately it's come 5 months too late, and that is a hell of a delay.
The official statement was actually quite short. I'll just read it now for anyone who hasn't seen it. I presume everyone has. Erik ten Hag has left his role as Manchester United's men's first team manager. Erik was appointed in April 2022 and led the club to 2 domestic trophies, winning the Carabao Cup and the FA Cup. We are grateful to Erik for everything he has done during his time with us and wish him well for the future. Ruud van Nistelrooy will take charge of the team as interim head coach, supported by the current coaching team, whilst a permanent head coach is recruited. There's a few bits to pick apart from that, but I guess we'll begin with, are you surprised at the absence of Sir Jim Ratcliffe's voice? And Dan Ashworth's voice on that statement, because in communications from the club in the last 6 months or so, their voices have been present on those releases.
Yeah, and it's quite a curt statement, really. It's quite a cold statement. It reminds me a bit of Jose Mourinho's sacking statement. That I can't remember how many words that was, but it was a similar word count. They were gushing about Ole Gunnar Solskjaer after he was sacked. So gushing, in fact, that I had to check he had been sacked. They were talking about how he'd in the background. It was, oh, he reset the culture. He did this. He gave this academy player his debut. Blah blah blah. When really, if he was worthy of a short statement than Ten Hag was. Ten Hag did win 2 trophies. He did give United some great days. I think it just to have actually offered some quotes from Ashworth, or maybe not Ratcliffe, because I think that would have looked quite false. And I'm not saying I wouldn't want someone to be inauthentic. And there've been some statements from Ratcliffe this year where you read it and you think, I remember when we were in the mix zone at Wembley and his statement dropped and a colleague said, as if he said that. And that's the problem with statements a lot of the time, that nobody has actually spoken to someone in that way. But I think Ashworth, at the very least, could have given offered some kindness, at least added a human touch to it. It just looks it looks very cold. But that's how Ineos have operated this calendar year. They've callously cut 250 jobs, and questions are still raised about the logic of that when they then go and spend £200 million under a manager that they didn't want to keep. And it's sometimes it's better to be short and sweet and just move on. And I get that logic, but also I think United, the image they project far too often is unbefitting of the great club they are or were in terms of the football sense.
Before we move on to Van Nistelrooy, as I've said, he was mentioned in that statement, and who could potentially succeed Erik ten Hag a bit later in the podcast. It's worth going back to that decision, isn't it, Samuel, in the summer, because we sat on podcasts at length around that time in spring when those hectic games were being played out and United was so disappointing and looked so poorly coached. And we said, Ten Hag, it was time for him to go. You could tell he was running out of road. He oversees that special performance against Manchester City in the FA Cup final, but we did not change our tune. One game shouldn't have decided his future, and Ineos should have still brought the axe down. They obviously backed him, but when you look at the stats from last season, United suffered a record number of defeats in the Premier League. They conceded the most goals in a campaign. He oversaw 19 defeats in all competitions. We've said multiple times, the unwanted records just stacked up. United were out of Europe before Christmas, out of the Carabao Cup before Christmas. Why did Ineos keep Ten Hag in charge, considering the compelling evidence that was stacked against him at that time?
Well, there was a power vacuum in that Barada and Ashworth weren't in the building, and Ratcliffe clearly didn't want to make the decision. You saw how uncomfortable he was in the mix zone, walking to the dressing room at Wembley. And in the end, you've got a cycling team principal going to Ibiza to tell Ten Hag that his contract isn't going to be shredded. Again, I'll go back to what's a befitting image of Manchester United. Having a cycling team principal calling the shots effectively over whether a manager stays or goes is not the way to go about it. And I've still not heard anything that suggests that Sir Dave Brailsford is worthy of telling United what to do or should be overseeing anything going on at Manchester United. This guy his background, his wheelhouse is cycling. And we said it, they took 17 days for their end of season review to draw conclusions that had long since been concluded before the end of the season. And the remarkable thing is, in the rationale that they forwarded to us today for why they've sacked him now, they actually mentioned the league position and the goal difference of last season. So, all right, you've acknowledged that. And I said that he's got to be sacked just on the league form of last season. So why didn't you sack him? And they looked at candidates. They spoke to every Tom, Dick and Harry. And okay, maybe they didn't have the right feeling from some of them or what have you, but they're in a much worse position now as far as the table is concerned. And they're in an even worse position where it comes to sourcing a manager, because it's bloody difficult to source a top draw manager at this stage of the season. Ten Hag is the earliest in-season managerial sacking at United in the post-war era. And previously, when they have made that change, you've seen how it's gone. Mourinho, when they opted for a caretaker, they made a mistake making him the permanent manager a few months later. The Rangnick experiment as an interim didn't work. They ended up having their worst season in decades. A bit different with David Moyes and Ryan Giggs, because I think Giggs only had 4 matches in charge at the end of that season when he was caretaker. Ron Atkinson, of course, was sacked in early November '86, and the rest is history with Alex Ferguson coming in. And look, Aberdeen are top at the moment, and it's mainly Scottish managers who have made Manchester United the club that it is. Although I'm not too sure if the Aberdeen manager is a Scot. But when you do it mid-season, you see how tricky it is. Ron Atkinson replaced Dave Sexton for the start of the 81-82 season. Sexton replaced Doherty at the start of the 77-78 season. Doherty did come in midway through 72-73, but of course the following season, United got relegated. So, and I suppose now looking at it, it's remarkable that Doherty, 18 months in at United, kept his job. But look at how wonderful a few years they had after that, where they tore it up in Division 2, got to an FA Cup final, lost it, but then got back to Wembley the following year and won their first trophy since the European Cup against Liverpool to deny Liverpool the treble in 77. So history tells us it doesn't really go well for United for the rest of that season when they make a change during the season. Now, it did under Solskjaer go very, very well for 3 months, more or less, his first 3 months, essentially when he was just the caretaker manager. But my God, how that season did tail off. I mean, there were some absolute horror shows. The Everton 4-0 drubbing on Easter Sunday, getting hammered by Barcelona in Camp Nou. Even the draw at Huddersfield Town and the infamous Luke Shaw waddling back into defence video, where they failed to beat a team that were already relegated that day, I think, and didn't qualify for the Champions League. So they had to do it now, but we go back to the point that if they'd done it in the summer, they get a fresh face in. There were options galore. Tuchel, Pochettino, Kieran McKenna, whoever. But now there aren't as many options. Tuchel and Pochettino, both in national team management. You half wonder whether there's an element of regret going on with if not both of them, but at least in the case of Pochettino, perhaps just rushing into that US men's national team job. But you look at the bookies shortboard and the names are quite realistic, and a lot of the names are managers who are out of work. And because of the financial pickle United are in with PSR and FFP, they have to be careful there, because they've foolishly extended Ten Hag's contract, which has ensured that he's going to get a much bigger compensation whack than had they not done anything with his contract. And then how much can they afford to buy a name coach out of their job? And who is that name? And I think there's a huge amount of risk attached with just about any named coach that is a realistic appointment out there. Because let's face it, it's not going to be Pep Guardiola or Mikel Arteta or Arne Slot or Hansi Flick, etc. And there's a lot to mull over. And to be honest, it's a pretty thankless task that Ashworth and Barada are in when it comes to deciding on who that next manager is going to be, because I don't think there is one choice who is going to completely unite the fan base. Ironically, other than maybe Van Nistelrooy, but that would just be pulling at the heartstrings. And I don't for a single second think that United should be making Van Nistelrooy the permanent manager.
At what point this season do you think the new football structure thought, hang on a minute, we've made a mistake here? Because Liverpool hammered United at Old Trafford, obviously at the beginning of September. They went to Southampton. That was a great performance, although Southampton are very poor. Lost, obviously won 3-0. Crystal Palace, goalless draw. The next game, FC 21-1. The wheels started to fall off a bit then, because Tottenham obviously won 3-0 after that. And then the game before the international break, Samuel, it was lifeless. It was just so dull and boring. And on the face of it, a point at Villa Park was a good result. But when you looked at the context of the season and how poorly they'd started, Ten Hag had oversaw the worst start to a Premier League campaign. They could have made the change then in October, as you've said. They didn't, and that would have been ideal considering the state of play. And he's been given time, and then he's been sacked after the West Ham game when arguably that was one of their better performances in the first half. They've only lost the game because the finishing was so poor. They had a really good first half. Obviously, West Ham and then the penalty as well. But it's interesting, isn't it, how it's happened after that game? They've finally taken ownership. Was it too late? Do you know what I'm trying to say?
I imagine the week or the block of games that probably killed him off were 20, Tottenham, Porto, and Villa to a lesser extent. I mean, Ratcliffe's presence at Villa, it set the cat among the pigeons, because before then he was only going to properly big games. It was the big six, if you like. I hate using that phrase. Fortunately, it's a phrase that's been killed pretty much. But it was going to Tottenham or Liverpool or Chelsea, or he went to Arsenal at home, and of course he went to City in the cup final. So he literally went to games against the other really big hitters. Aston Villa are a better club; they're a better team than United these days, but they're not a big hitter. They last won a trophy in 1996. It was the Coca-Cola Cup. So his presence there did feel significant, particularly after what had gone on against 20. Not so much 20. I think what didn't help with the 20 game, that would have been completely forgotten about had Christian Eriksen not come out and said that 20 looked up for it more than United, and then Ten Hag agreed with him. If you're a co-owner and you see that, you're entitled to ask what the hell is going on here, if he's agreeing with that, and why is he not motivating them? And Ten Hag said last week about that Tottenham game, I mean, this was how far removed he'd become from the Ten Hag of his first season at press conferences. He said, I ignore that game. You can't deny or ignore the fact that Tottenham absolutely outplayed United for 42 minutes before Bruno Fernandes was sent off. And then United were actually okay 10v11 because Fernandes was stinking the place out before he was sent off. And then they get battered 3-0. There have been games in the past where United have had an unfortunate red card and they've got battered and they've not carped on about it for 3 weeks later, which is what Ten Hag did. The Porto result was troubling. I mean, selfishly, I say this professionally, I was annoyed United equalised at the death because it was another bloody rewrite, another bloody late goal. And speaking to some fans who went to that game, I couldn't hear the celebrations particularly loudly either. But I think there was almost it was like, we've got a draw there, but is that going to really help us in the grand scheme of things? There was a hollowness about some of the performances, some of the results they were getting recently, and Porto was an example of that. And the Villa game was, as you said, it was unwatchable. It's one of the worst games I've ever covered in a press box. And then United wouldn't even clarify that he was keeping his job. And at times they've tried to pick a fight over our coverage of the manager and other people's coverage of the manager, and Ten Hag's called it lies, fairy tales. Well, yeah, it's not a fairy tale, is it? It's very real. He's been sacked, and they'd have decided he was getting sacked probably before he uttered that. Yet it does beg the question: why was he allowed to come in after the October internationals and manage 3 games of a 7-game block? Why not just get rid of him there? Why not put Van Nistelrooy in charge there? But maybe there's some strategy behind it, and United will communicate that to us one day. But I won't hold my breath.
Do you not think it's staggering as well, Samuel, how he has had Ten Hag very enviable backing compared to other managers in the post-Sir Alex Ferguson era? I mean, you talk to Mourinho,
Oh, yeah.
you troop to Turkey, and Mourinho must be looking at Ten Hag and thinking, if I had that backing at United, I would have probably won the league, considering the funds he's been given. He spent over £600 million. Club sources said to us today, there's no more excuses. And that's just the bottom line of it. And it begs the question, when they knew this was going to happen in the summer, when you look at last season, how bad it was, as you've said, he's been given kind of free roam in the transfer market. The signings were sold to us as the football structure agreed with Ten Hag, and everyone was in unison, in agreement on those signings. But as you said, Ten Hag's fingerprints are on all those transfers, aren't they really? with the exception of Lenny Euro, perhaps.
By and large, in terms of this summer, I was told that Ugarte was not his first choice,
Ugarte
which
as well. Yeah, good point.
you look at that and you look how underplayed he's been recently, and it's not a surprise. I mean, Sofyan Amrabat suggested that Ten Hag wanted to keep him permanently as well. They were sensible in not making that decision. There's a reason why Amrabat is playing for Fenerbahce. I don't think he was a player that United should ever have been considering. There were people at the club who didn't think that they should be going for Amrabat as well, but that's the sway Ten Hag had, and they yielded to him far too often. That's what makes the recent summer just gone particularly unforgivable, in that they had a Dutch manager they didn't want to keep, and then they signed 3 players from the Netherlands, 2 who had worked under him before, another one who is Dutch as well. And the next manager who comes in, does anybody seriously think he's going to be happy with Rasmus Højlund and Joshua Zirkzee as his striker choices? He's not. He's going to say, right, for a start, I'm going to need a proven goal scorer here. And then the United Powerbrags will say, well, unfortunately, we spent more than £100 million on these 2. We've not really got the funds to do that. And that's not his problem, but it's a hospital pass he's played straight away. And what was his best signing? I mean, Martinez had far too many injuries. His form has really tailed off this season as well. He's not been a success. He's not been a failure. Somewhere in between. Casemiro was good in his first season, but since then, I know he's picked up a little bit of late, but they would have liked to have got rid of him in the summer.
I would say Mason Mount actually is probably the best Ten Hag signing.
I thought you were serious for
you weren't
a moment.
Expecting that. Come on,
it's probably Johnny Evans, isn't it? And Johnny Evans, let's face it,
but that fell on his lap, didn't it?
But no, Darren Fletcher's his mate and probably his neighbour, and said, "Oh, why don't you come in for training?" And Ten Hag says, "Oh, why don't you come in on the tour?" And then someone else says, "Oh, why don't you have a contract?" And then someone else says, "Oh, you need to play this week and next week because all of our defenders are crocked." It's just even that positive feel-good story of Johnny Evans having a hell of a homecoming, winning the FA Cup with United. There's something farcical about it, and he's become way more important than he'd ever have imagined. Going back to United, having been released at the age of 35 by Leicester City, and there were not proper processes put in place. And Dan Ashworth, Omar Barada, they cannot cite excuses for the way they've gone about their activity in the summer just gone. Mazraoui has looked a reasonable signing, looks quite solid. He's done decently, I'd say, so far. I don't think they should ever have signed Matthias de Ligt, a signing based on what he did 5 years ago rather than what he's done in the last 5 years. Zirkzee I'd never watched, but just from speaking to someone, it didn't sound particularly inspiring, and he has been a real dud so far. Lenny Oro, we're not going to be able to judge him properly for a good while yet, not just because of his injury, but because of his age also. Ugarte, under another manager, perhaps he'll become the linchpin of the team that maybe some of the people at the club see him as, but he's been underplayed. He's been eased into the team, or he's been mismanaged. I mean, when was his full debut? That would have been Barnsley, I imagine. Obviously he was signed late on, and he's another of these players who goes away on international duty, comes back, and it's a guarantee that he's going to be on the bench. Someone needs to nip that in the bud and maximise him. Whoever the next manager is that comes in, they have got to maximise him, because clearly they feel as though Mainu Ugarte is the long-term midfield axis when the pair of them are available. But as Gary Neville said, when Ugarte is taking a backseat to Casemiro, just because he's someone Ten Hag trusts more and is more familiar to him, and ironically Casemiro was a John Murtough engineered signing, then those upstairs are going to probably take a dim view of that. That said, the team he played yesterday was completely logical, and ironically Ten Hag's final defeat was probably, of all the losses United have had under him, the one that he was probably the least accountable for, looking the way that game panned out and how it was decided.
Before we go into the second part, let's talk about the good work that Ten Hag did at the club, Samuel, because there was a lot of good. Obviously, we've discussed a lot of the bad, and the bad did begin to outweigh the good last season and into this campaign. But you think back to the wins against Barcelona, Manchester City at Old Trafford in his first year, winning 2 trophies, which he doesn't let us forget about, or he hasn't let us forget about in the last 6 months or so. And he addressed the poor culture at the club as well. There was a power struggle between players and manager, and he kind of brought back that dynamic. He saw off Ronaldo in no nonsense fashion. I don't know if you saw Piers Morgan tweeting today. He's just a bit of a melon, Piers Morgan, isn't he? And Garnacho and Kobbie Mainoo as well. He oversaw their development, and he's been given a lot of credit for that. And they're now 2 first-team regulars to both play for their countries, Argentina and England. So we've discussed the bad, but Ten Hag can look back, and there is some good. There was a lot of good during his time in charge, wasn't there?
Well, the silverware, obviously,
the first season was fantastic.
Yeah, the first season was largely calm and enjoyable because United were winning and winning regularly. They had an 8-game winning run. They had days at Wembley. They had a glory night against Barcelona. They had a tremendous night against Liverpool. They won the Old Trafford derby that season. The home win against Tottenham was, in terms of performance level and style and as their identity under Ten Hag, that was probably the peak, I think. They were so dominant and so overwhelmed Tottenham that evening. I think it was October 2022. United were phenomenal, 1-2-0, but should have won by 3 times as many goals as they scored that night. It was a truly brilliant performance. And that's the pity, that there was so much good groundwork laid down that first season. And he did have, there were politics going on. I mean, he had to deal with Ronaldo a couple of times, but he saw him off quite swiftly and sensibly because he had to, and the club had to get rid of him after what he did. It was unforgivable, the manner of his exit, and United were better off without him that season. Before and after he left permanently, the strategic review in the background, of course, that occupied a lot of. It took up a lot of column inches in newspapers, and there was a lot of coverage of it. But I don't think it necessarily affected the way Ten Hag was managing. The decision to get rid of David De Gea, I think, was logical. And okay, Andre Onana had a difficult first season, but he started off quite well this season. And I think ultimately he is an upgrade on De Gea. He's a more modern goalkeeper. He has got a lot in his locker. I know De Gea is, weighed in today in his own way with a mere emoji, which suggests that he thinks that Ten Hag has got his comeuppance. I think that's the way it's been read by most. But I don't think United have hugely missed De Gea's overall presence, because he did make mistakes in Ten Hag's season, and of course he was a great shot stopper and still is. I mean, he's saving more penalties with greater regularity, it seems, these days.
It was the right decision to move De Gea on, though, wasn't it?
It was with the right intentions. They wanted to finesse their style, get on the front foot, and they needed a goalkeeper who plays on the front foot, and that's Onana. That's not De Gea. It's never been his game. And unfortunately, Onana was a first choice signing, but the other 2 main signings that summer, Mount and Rasmus Højlund, were not. Mason Mount was a long way down the list in terms of ideal midfield signings, and Mount has been one of the worst United signings of my lifetime. When you factor all of it, everything into it, his experience, his cachet at Chelsea, how he's fared at international level, to go to United and play as little as he has, and to be as injury prone as he has been, and just not really offer anything apart from 1 goal at Brentford. He's been a huge disappointment. And that was a year after Antony came in, and Antony has been an even greater disappointment. He's been worse than that. He's been dreadful. He's been embarrassing. Even when he gets injured against Fenerbahce with just a sprained ankle, he's an embarrassment. He's nearly crying. If he ever suffered a break, God forbid, he would probably cry himself to death. I suffered a sprained ankle during university, but I was still playing 5-a-side football, and we soldier on. But Antony, I just look at Antony and I think, no. When I heard that United were interested in Antony, I hoped for their sake they weren't, because you just get a vibe of someone at times that they're not right for United. And it was the same with Mason Mount. I hoped they weren't going to be interested in Mason Mount, not only were they interested in him, they committed to spending up to £60 million to sign him. And from that summer, that 2023 summer, things have just spiraled. There was something bubbling under the surface that summer, and that something was Mason Greenwood. And that was the one individual issue that they cocked up royally, not just Ten Hag, but Richard Arnold, John Murtough, and those three are no longer at the club, and those four, if you want to include Greenwood. But Ten Hag said yesterday about looking at himself in the mirror after a defeat. He should have had a look at himself in the mirror after deciding to want to have Mason Greenwood back in his squad. It was such an obviously outrageously bad decision to do that, when the easy decision was just to try and find him a club elsewhere and do what they eventually did, let him go out on loan, then maybe get a fee for him, which is what they did. The fact that they were trying to reintegrate him into the squad was outrageous. And Richard Arnold never survived that, really. He never quite came back from that. I don't think John Murtough ever quite came back from that either. I know, of course, Ineos were a long way down the line by that point in terms of their minority stake, and those two were always going to go anyway. And it comes back to that point. They changed just about everything apart from the manager. And eventually they've changed the manager. And that's because Ratcliffe has belatedly realised that the manager is actually an extremely important figure at a football club. He has underestimated the importance of the manager.
It's a good point you make about Ten Hag being open to Greenwood coming back into the squad, because he also wanted to sign Arnautovic, didn't he, in his first summer in charge? And he's had a questionable history, should we say, and the Mark Overmars stuff as well. I don't really think a whole lot was made of that across here, but it definitely caught my eye that Ten Hag defended.
There was some moral conundrums,
yeah,
shall we say.
That's the way to put it. We've got to word it sensitively how we talk about this, but definitely some red flags, I would say, in that regard. I think my biggest gripe, Samuel, with Ten Hag's time at the club in the last year and a half is just been the lack of style. I mean, in that first season, you could tell what they were trying to do. They had a fantastic defensive foundation, and Rashford was playing out of his skin. But in the last 18 months, to look so poorly coached, to have such a lack of identity when you've spent so much money, that's just unforgivable at the top level, isn't it? And you compare United to the other top teams, Arsenal, Liverpool, City, you all know what they're trying to do. It's so easy to recognise their style. And when the next manager comes in, that's what I want to see. And I presume you're on the same page.
Yes, but when did United last have a style?
In Ten Hag's first season, I'd argue.
It wasn't a desired style. It was a means to an end, wasn't it? They were pragmatic. They got by, but you saw that as that's a building block. Now expand, which is clearly what they wanted to do last season, but for a myriad of reasons, they weren't able to execute it. They didn't have the right striker. They started getting injuries, and the injuries kept on piling up and barely stopped. But he still had more than £600 million invested into the squad. And people said recently, oh, this is his squad now. No, this was his squad last season. When you looked at their strongest 11 last season, the goalkeeper was his signing. The Martinez defender was his signing. Luke Shaw signed a new contract under Ten Hag. Dalot signed a new contract under Ten Hag. Rafael Varane, okay, there's no real serious attachment there. Casemiro was his signing. Mainu made his debut under Ten Hag. You'd have said Højlund, his signing. Fernandes was appointed captain by Ten Hag. Antony was his signing. Rashford signed a new contract under Ten Hag. Before a ball was kicked last season, that was his squad. That's why it shouldn't have taken as long as 15 months. Is it 15 months more or less? Yeah, 15 months to have sacked him. It should have been 5 months earlier. And as United outlined today to us, there were no excuses. And that was probably the standout phraseology in their background as to why they've decided to finally sack Ten Hag. No excuses.
And ironically, Samuel, we've been saying
Ten Hag was looking for excuses, wasn't he? He was looking for excuses for a long time.
Every game we would say that in the last 10 months or whatever, when we've been analysing these performances, we've said multiple times, reiterating the point, there've been no excuses. That is his squad. He spent all the money. that is his team. Once the injury crisis has been dealt with, obviously, I mean, this season he had to go and they had to improve and have continued to regress, and he's bit the bullet. We'll leave it there for part one. We'll be back in a moment for part two. Welcome back to part two of the Manchester is Red podcast. What a way to end the first part. Now, Samuel, let's talk about potential replacements for Erik ten Hag. But to begin with, we'll speak about Ruud van Nistelrooy, because he's going to take over on an interim basis. It felt inevitable, didn't it, when Van Nistelrooy was appointed as a first-team coach in the summer? We all saw it coming. Everyone saw it coming. And we actually discussed it a few weeks ago in depth. Is there a possibility? Clearly there is a possibility. How much of a possibility do you think he'll get it on a permanent basis? I guess that's what everyone wants to know, because you've talked about the Solskjaer parallels. He came in, he had a purple patch, he succeeded, and he was given the job on a permanent basis. Surely they can't repeat that with that lesson being so close. I mean, you've got recent evidence there to suggest that doesn't work.
If they'd sacked Ten Hag in May, Van Nistelrooy would not have been in the conversation to take over. Not much has changed since then. So because he's the assistant now, does not necessarily mean he should be in the conversation now. His odds are going to be short because he's already in the dugout. He's been in the dugout for 3 months. But I come back to that point. When United were sourcing potential managers, potential replacements back in May, Van Nistelrooy was not getting a look in. And there's a reason why Burnley were looking at him as their potential replacement for Vincent Kompany in the summer. You cannot go from someone who might have become the Burnley manager, and Burnley are a championship club, by the way, to someone who might become the Manchester United manager. That should make their mind up immediately. And I don't have faith in them to make their mind up immediately, because it's been proven this year that it's amateur hour really with Ineos and running Manchester United as a football club. They've got so much wrong already, and they've got so much so obviously wrong as well, that you wouldn't put it past them to. I mean, they've made decisions that would make Ed Woodward blush. They've been more indecisive than Ed Woodward over a manager. So who's to say they wouldn't do what Ed Woodward did and give an old favourite the caretaker stint and then make him manager on a permanent basis? They've got to be objective during this process. We don't know how many games Van Nistelrooy is going to get in charge. Obviously, they've got 4 more until the November internationals. It's 4 home games, so the atmosphere is going to be quite buoyant because Van Nistelrooy is loved. It's not gone unnoticed at recent away games that Van Nistelrooy, I think, purposefully has waited until the players are starting to move away from applauding the away supporters, and he's been the last to applaud them. And of course, United fans end the afternoon or the evening singing Ruud van Nistelrooy's name. So really, since August, Ten Hag's not even been the most popular man in the dugout. That's been Van Nistelrooy because of his playing career for United. He's one of their greatest overseas players, and it's because of that also that he shouldn't get this job. Just don't besmirch the man's reputation. If there's a way of keeping him on the staff under the new manager in an assistant capacity, by all means do that. But that already feels like it could be compromised. That said, I think it was pretty clear that Van Nistelrooy was the coach who had been foisted onto Ten Hag. Rene, there was a lot of compromise going on with all those changes in the summer. Do I get a new contract? No, you just have your contract extended. Do I get to keep Mitchell van der Gaag? No, but you can have some Dutch coaches. Okay, can I have my mate Rene Hakke? Yes, but you're going to have Ruud van Nistelrooy as well. Okay. How did they actually think that was all going to work and work out well? And it hasn't worked out well. So it'll be interesting. It's going to be an interesting week for the club, for Ruud van Nistelrooy. Of course, hopefully it's a good week for him. He's, as I said, he's one of the club's greatest overseas players, and he will not be short of well wishers at those 2 home games this week.
Van Nistelrooy is the maker's favourite at 6-4 to get the job permanently. Then it's Xavi, who obviously left Barcelona. Gareth Southgate is at 6-1. Ruben Amorim is 13-2. Thomas Frank, Julian Nagelsmann, Graham Potter, Michael Carrick, Kieran McKenna, and then you can have any price on the rest of them. bookmakers odds are easily shifted, Samuel, and not always right. They're usually quite crap, to be fair. But out of those who I've just read out, is there a name standing out to you? Is there someone you could see managing Manchester United?
I think it's the right question you ask, but you also have to add a bit more to it. Can you see them managing Manchester United to the title? And from that list,
Nagelsmann's the standout, isn't it?
he was the only one I could think, but I just don't see him leaving that Germany role ahead of the World Cup in 2026. His contract was extended until the World Cup. It would be reasonably costly, I imagine, to buy him out of his contract with the DFB. But if he is attainable, if he wants it, absolutely United should go for him. But it feels like he would be difficult to prize from one of the plum international roles. Roberto Mancini's free. I don't know where he is.
He's just left
on
his job in
bookmakers.
Saudi Arabia.
I know, yeah, I know. But as I said earlier, the odds, looking on Odds Checker, there are a lot of free agents there. And to be honest, when I attended Xavi's press conference before Barcelona played United last year, and we then went to Ten Hag's later in the day, and of course Ajax have a cultural link with Barcelona through Johan Cruyff. You felt at the time that there could be a job swap here at some point in the future with these two. You could easily have seen Ten Hag at that point taking over Barcelona in the future, and you could easily have seen Xavi taking over United in the future. Maybe not quite as straightforward now, but Xavi is a worthy candidate. He's an excellent English speaker. I think he still speaks quite fondly of his experience making his European debut at Old Trafford back in 1998. He would implement a style. I think there would be a very specific way of playing, and he would set out his stall quite early on. Whether that style would cut it in the Premier League, there's an element of risk, but he would be a name. He's a name. Two, he's a good communicator. Three, his background suggests that he would get the team playing good football and with an identity. So there's a lot to get on board with there. But I mean, there's no appointment that would come without any caveats, really. And it's not as there aren't as many compelling choices or worthy choices, I would say, as there were in May or 3 weeks ago when Thomas Tuchel was in charge. They really cocked it up there. I mean, Tuchel, I think, would have been ideal for United. Again, I know that there are issues with him, and there are qualms that fans would have had, and I suspect he would have been. He's a manager who wouldn't have united the fan base, but you can't always worry about the supporters. Look what happened in May. Oh God, the fans, they want to keep him now. We best keep him. Look how that turned out. As I said before, the FA Cup final and the decision to keep him, it's a great example of why supporters should not dictate the running of a football club or run a big football club.
Yeah, I could definitely get behind Xavi when I think about it. His English was fantastic, wasn't it? In that press conference at Old Trafford, he spoke really well. The only blot on his copybook was when he was asked about Qatar potentially investing in United. He said it would be very good, and he welcomed it. He said, "Yeah, that'd be a good one." Do you want to discuss your line then, Samuel? Because you've wrote today that United have not ruled out a formal approach for Ole Gunnar Solskjaer because of the possibility that they would be restricted because of restricted to managerial free agents, I should say. Struggling with my mouth words there. Solskjaer's still out of work. There's been talks that he's been talking to a quote unquote big club recently out in Norway. Could that be United?
A big club in Norway.
Reports in Norway.
I know.
Yeah.
There's a reason why he's not managed since United sacked him, and maybe United are the only club he can manage now. But when I was told about that, I thought, really, why would they do that? I think that they would take leave of their senses if they went back to him. I didn't expect to be writing that Ole Gunnar Solskjaer could be in the frame to manage Manchester United again this morning, put it that way. So he there would be absolutely no logic to that. It's, I almost feel bad that I wrote it, but it was, it's credibly sourced and properly done, thoroughly done, etc. And of course, you need to come up with news after the big news today, and there's a lot of reaction to the reaction. So that was one line there, and then it was on to Ten Hag's 5,200 word obituary. But I'd a bit like the interest in Mason Mount and Anthony. I hope that United don't follow through with it. I think that would be illogical on one of the dumbest scales possible. I mean, Ratcliffe said 5 years ago that United spent dumb money on Fred, but they've been even dumber in the past 5 months.
Come on then, gun to your head. If you had to choose, who would you rather be the next manager of United, Solskjaer or Southgate? You thought you had free rein there, didn't you?
I thought you were just going to. Yeah, I was just going to say Julian Nagelsmann. Oh my God. Do you know what? For the sake of variety, if with those two, Southgate. But let me just say that if Ineos ever dared go down that line, I would be condemning it in a piece. Have no fear about that. That is not an appointment I could get behind, even though he's media friendly and comes across well at times in press conferences. No, that would, as I said, you have to look at a manager who you believe can make Manchester United champions in the near future, not too distant future. And there's no way Gareth Southgate could do it. There's no way Solskjaer could do it. It feels like I've
well, exactly. We've done dedicated podcasts on Southgate before, haven't we? I just wanted to get a kind of final word.
I'm sure they
has been sacked.
To say he should great downloads.
Sure, everyone was very interested in those podcasts. Yeah. Anything else to add then, Samuel? Look, you said Nagelsmann there. He would be my choice. I've been banging the drum for a while. The obvious stumbling block, as you said, is he's contracted with Germany's national team until 2026. I like to think United could present a project that is impossible to turn down, whether that is actually possible because of FFP, etc. You've mentioned yourself. But out of the landscape, the managerial landscape now, he's the one that stands out, isn't he? He really is.
I think so, but even with him, maybe we're overrating him a little bit. He certainly, when he went to Bayern Munich, I don't think anybody necessarily thought that he would have left that role as early as he did and gone into international management at such a relatively young age. I think he's 36, 37. But yeah, again, it's a difficult one. I think there's a lot to get behind, but he's not managing the Premier League, of course, and did he do his best work at Leipzig rather than Bayern Munich? Is there an argument that he's somewhat in decline because Germany underachieved at the Euros, only getting to the quarterfinals? I know there was a lot of rancor about the manner of their defeat to Spain, where it looked like they should have had a penalty late on. But Germany, if they go out a quarterfinal at a major tournament, that's not overachieving. That is definitely underachieving. It's even if they get to the semi-finals, sometimes it's a mere underachievement. I just wish for United's sake that they could turn back the clock 5 months and make the change that they should have made then, because there were much more worthy candidates at that point. I think even Kieran McKenna, who of course there'd have been huge risk in appointing him, but you could have sold it. You could have sold it at that time, and here we are now.
He still could, Samuel. I mean, he signed a new deal at Ipswich. He's trying to consolidate them in the Premier League. But if United come knocking, I've written a few pieces that the job doesn't come around often. In this, it quite literally has in the last 11 years. But in a manager's career, all the cards have to fall right, and it has to be right for them. And United could obviously tempt McKenna, who is at Ipswich. No disrespect to Ipswich, to come to Old Trafford to return.
Yeah, look, and would he be that expensive? Yeah, he shouldn't be. But have things moved on, and United have greater needs now, and they need to be in the Champions League next season. They need a coach who has got that Champions League nous, and that of course does count against McKenna, even though he has helped United in Champions League. Would it be campaigns? Yes, it would have been campaigns as part of the backroom staff for Mourinho and then Solskjaer. So he has got experience of it, but he hasn't as a manager, and so they need someone who's going to come in and get results as soon as possible, and that's why I thought Tuchel was ideal a few weeks ago, but they missed the boat on him, and they're worse off now when they're in a more invidious position. Ruben Amorim, of course, I think there's a lot to like there, and there are people in Portugal who are still surprised that surprised he's still at Sporting, but he's probably the favourite to replace Pep Guardiola next summer as well. And if Guardiola is indeed going, and Manchester City going to let him slip the net when his mate Hugo Viana is about to go there as the director of football, it's a fascinating subplot to that, I suppose.
He'd actually agreed to become West Ham's manager, hadn't he, before?
Yeah, he had.
He got the job, and that fell through. So that was interesting. That's our second podcast of the day, Samuel. The first one won't get released, but I mean, it's a shame because there was a lot of good chatting there. But we've done another 50-minute episode, so thanks very much for your time.
It's nice to have spent whatever portion
2 hours with me
my
today,
day with you.
An hour and a half.
A 12th of my day with you. Spoiled.
We always have fun. Exactly.
Right.
Thanks to listeners as usual. We'll be back later in the week. Take care.